If you're into videos about supernatural phenomena, unsolved mysteries, and true crime, you've come to the right channel. We upload new videos 2 to 3 times a week, so if this sounds like the content you enjoy, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss any of our weekly uploads. Now, let's dive into the video. In the quiet, unassuming town of Townsend, Massachusetts, the Andrews family lived in a charming suburban home. The family consisted of a father, Brian, and his 2 daughters, Jessica and Annie. They had once been a picture of happiness, but their lives had been upended by the devastating loss of their mother, Linda, who had passed away after a prolonged battle with cancer. The once joyful home was now steeped in grief and sorrow, with each member of the family struggling to cope in their own way. Linda's death had left a void in their lives that was impossible to fill. Jessica at 16 was the older of the 2 sisters and had always been closer to her mother. Annie, only a couple of years younger, idolized Jessica, but she too was grappling with the loss. Brian, now a single father, found it difficult to navigate his daughter's grief while managing his own. The once vibrant home, filled with laughter and warmth, had grown cold and silent, with the echoes of the past haunting every room. As the months passed, Jessica sought solace from her grief by reaching out to new friends at school. She was an outgoing and social teenager, and she hoped that meeting new people might help fill the void left by her mother's death. It was around this time that she received an unexpected phone call from a boy named Daniel LaPlante. Daniel introduced himself as a friend of a friend, someone who had heard about Jessica through their mutual acquaintances. He was charming on the phone, speaking with a confidence that belied his age. Daniel described himself as tall, athletic, and handsome, the kind of boy who could easily sweep a girl off her feet. Flattered by the attention and eager for a distraction, Jessica agreed to go on a date with him. The anticipation of meeting someone new was a welcome distraction for Jessica, who had been drowning in sorrow. But when the day of the date arrived, her excitement quickly turned to disappointment. The boy who showed up at her door was not the person she had imagined. Daniel LaPlante was shorter, thinner, and far less attractive than he had claimed to be. His greasy hair and unsettling demeanor made Jessica uncomfortable, but she was too polite to back out of the date. They spent a few awkward hours together, and by the end of it, Jessica was relieved to return home, deciding that she did not want to see Daniel again. However, Daniel had other plans. Unbeknownst to Jessica, Daniel had become obsessed with her. He began calling her frequently, despite her attempts to distance herself. His behavior grew increasingly strange, and Jessica started to feel uneasy. But it wasn't until the strange events began happening in her home that the true horror of Daniel's obsession became clear. It started with small things: items going missing, doors that had been closed were found open, and an unsettling feeling that someone was watching them. Jessica and her sister Annie tried to brush it off, attributing the incidents to their grief-stricken minds playing tricks on them. But as the days passed, the disturbances became more frequent and more sinister. One night, Jessica and Annie were alone in the house. Their father was working late, and the girls were sitting together in the living room, trying to distract themselves with a movie. Suddenly, they heard a series of strange noises coming from within the walls. At first, they thought it might be a rat or some other small animal, but the sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic to be anything natural. It was as if someone, or something, was moving inside the walls. Terrified, the girls called their father, who rushed home and searched the house from top to bottom. He found nothing out of the ordinary and reassured his daughters that everything was fine. But the eerie feeling lingered, and the sounds continued. The next night, as the girls were getting ready for bed, they noticed something written on the wall of Jessica's bedroom. In what looked like blood-red writing, The words, "I'm in your room, come and find me," were scrawled across the wall. Panic-stricken, Jessica ran to get her father, who quickly called the police. The officers arrived and searched the entire house, but found no one. They dismissed it as a prank, or perhaps a result of the girls' overactive imaginations. But Jessica knew better. Someone was in their house. Days passed, and the tension in the Andrews home became unbearable. The strange noises persisted, and more disturbing messages appeared on the walls. "I'm still here," one read, and another simply said, "I'm watching you." The family was living in a constant state of fear, unsure of where the next terrifying event would come from. The psychological toll on the family was immense. Jessica began suffering from nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as she relived the terror in her dreams. Annie, who had always looked up to her big sister for comfort, now saw the fear in Jessica's eyes and became increasingly withdrawn. The sisters clung to each other, finding solace only in their shared terror. Brian, desperate to protect his daughters, installed new locks on every door and window, and even considered selling the house. But the thought of leaving the home where Linda's memory was so deeply embedded was too much to bear. He became hypervigilant, sleeping with a baseball bat by his bed, his ears attuned to every creak and groan of the house. Then, one night, as Jessica was lying in bed, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from inside her closet. Her heart pounding, she slowly got out of bed and approached the closet door. She could see something moving behind the slats of the closet door, but she was too terrified to open it. Instead, she screamed for her father, who burst into the room and flung the closet door open. What they found inside the closet would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There, hidden behind the clothes, was a small, crudely cut hole in the wall. Peering inside, Brian saw a narrow crawl space that seemed to run along the length of the house. Realizing that someone had been living in the walls, Brian immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, they carefully searched the crawl space and found something even more horrifying. Deep within the walls, they discovered a makeshift living area, a small, dark space where someone had been living. There were food wrappers, a sleeping bag, and even a collection of personal items that did not belong to the Andrews family. It was clear that someone had been living inside their walls, watching them and tormenting them. As the investigation continued, the police discovered that the person living in the walls was none other than Daniel LaPlante. He had somehow gained access to the house and had been hiding inside for weeks, possibly even months. His obsession with Jessica had driven him to invade their home, turning their lives into a living nightmare. But as the officers pulled Daniel LaPlante out of the walls, the full extent of his deranged behavior became evident. Daniel was not simply a disturbed teenager. He was a young man whose mind had been twisted by years of neglect and abuse. His obsession with Jessica had become all-consuming, driving him to create this elaborate, nightmarish scenario where he could live close to her without being seen, all the while terrorizing the family. The authorities quickly apprehended Daniel, who was found hiding in the crawl space when they conducted their final search of the house. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of burglary, breaking and entering, and harassment. The horror that the Andrews family had endured finally came to an end, but the psychological scars remained. As the trial loomed, more chilling details about Daniel LaPlante's past began to emerge. It was revealed that he had been sent to a psychiatric facility at a young age after showing signs of severe behavioral issues. His childhood had been marked by trauma, including allegations of physical and emotional abuse at the hands of his father. Daniel's time in the facility had done little to help him, and he was released back into the world without the necessary support to reintegrate into society. In the courtroom, Daniel LaPlante showed little remorse for his actions. His blank, emotionless expression as the charges were read sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. The Andrews family, sitting in the front row, could barely look at him, the memories of his terror still fresh in their minds. During the trial, the prosecution painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual whose obsession with Jessica Andrews had led him to commit unspeakable acts. They described how Daniel had meticulously planned his invasion of the Andrews home, studying the layout of the house, learning their routines, and choosing the perfect moment to slip inside. Once there, he had set up his hidden lair, emerging only when the family was asleep or away to move through the house, taking small items and leaving behind those terrifying messages. The defense, meanwhile, tried to argue that Daniel's actions were the result of his troubled upbringing and untreated mental illness. They presented evidence of his abusive childhood and the lack of proper care and intervention during his time in the psychiatric facility. But despite their efforts, the jury found Daniel LaPlante guilty on all counts. Daniel was sentenced to prison, where he would spend the next several years. But for the Andrews family, there was little comfort in knowing he was behind bars. The trauma they had experienced had left deep scars, both physical and emotional, that would take years to heal. The house, once a sanctuary for the Andrews family, had become a place of fear and trauma. Unable to continue living in the home where they had been so cruelly tormented, the family eventually moved away, hoping to leave the memories behind. They found a new house in a different town, but even as they tried to rebuild their lives, the haunting presence of Daniel LaPlante lingered in their minds.